A traveler came upon a wide, turbulent river. He knew the far shore held safety, but the current was too swift to swim. With great effort, he gathered reeds, vines, and bamboo, meticulously binding them into a strong raft. He pushed off, navigating the dangerous waters, and finally reached the peaceful, fertile bank. The traveler stumbled under the heavy raft. The wise hermit approached him. "Friend," he said, "the raft served its purpose. It brought you from danger to safety. If you carry the raft, you signal a readiness to return to the turbulent waters you escaped. If you leave it behind, you declare that the crossing is complete and final. The raft is a tool of transition. When the transition is done, the tool must be relinquished." The traveler understood. He gently placed the heavy structure on the sand. Relieved of the final weight, he turned his back fully on the river and walked toward the mountains, light and free. He ascended the mountain path. He plucked a single bloom, perfect and fragrant. Its beauty filled him with joy. The wise hermit appeared beside a moss-covered stone. The raft was heavy and useful. The flower is light and delightful. Yet both occupy the hand and distract the mind. If you carry beauty, you carry the fear of its fading. The flower is perfect on the branch. On your path, it is only a burden of desire. The traveler gently placed the heavy structure on the sand. Relieved of the final weight, he turned his back fully on the river and walked toward the mountains, light and free. He ascended the mountain path. He plucked a single bloom, perfect and fragrant. Its beauty filled him with joy. The wise hermit appeared beside a moss-covered stone. The raft was heavy and useful. The flower is light and delightful. Yet both occupy the hand and distract the mind. If you carry beauty, you carry the fear of its fading. The flower is perfect on the branch. On your path, it is only a burden of desire. The traveler gently placed the perfect flower back upon the earth and continued his ascent, his hands finally empty, his mind clear. He gazed outward and inward. The world dissolved into boundless space. He saw the infinite expanse of stars, the endless cycle of becoming. "This is the ultimate truth," he whispered to himself. "I have seen the limitlessness." The wise hermit stood before him, silhouetted against the sky. "You have seen far," said the hermit. "You have seen the truth of infinity. But this vision is a window, not the destination. Look closer. Look at the lifespan of the star, the single moment of the flower. All are finite. All are defined by their boundary. The ultimate truth is not merely the infinite or the finite, but the understanding that both are perspectives arising from the mind. Continue your climb. The highest truth awaits the mind that holds no view." The traveler asked, "If all views are false, what then is real truth?" The hermit sighed. "Truth is often mistaken for belief. For one person, truth is the mountain. For another, it is the valley. Because every person sees and believes differently, personal truths multiply. They are subjective views, context-limited, and therefore false views. The Buddha taught that all views are snares. To say the world is infinite is a view. To say it is finite is a view. Nibbana is the unconditioned, the deathless state. It is not found by adopting the right view, but by abandoning the habit of holding views. When the mind ceases to grasp at any perspective, even the most sublime, the nameless state is revealed. Seek not a truth to hold, but the freedom from holding." The traveler walked with a new, quiet determination. The path was no longer a desperate search for answers, but a mindful unfolding of the present moment. Yet the old habits of the mind, though weakened, still flickered. He came upon a small, secluded spring where rare, fragrant orchids bloomed. An instinctive urge, a subtle, sweet craving for possession or prolonged enjoyment, arose within him. The hermit, walking silently beside him, spoke softly. "The stream flows forward, but the eddies of old habit remain. You have abandoned the illusion that the self is real, but the self still seeks pleasure. You have cut the roots of false view, but the tendrils of desire still seek the sun." Later, a sudden cold wind whipped dust into the traveler's eyes, causing a sharp sting. A flash of irritation, a momentary resentment toward the unpleasantness, crossed his mind. "And here," the hermit continued, "is the shadow of aversion. You see clearly that the self is an illusion, yet the mind still demands comfort and resents pain. The next stage of the journey is to tame these two great fires, desire and ill will, to diminish their heat until they are merely embers. Only then will you return to this world but once more." The traveler understood that the teachings were not merely philosophy, but a mirror reflecting his own mind. He spent days observing the mind's tendency to either grasp at the pleasant or push away the unpleasant. He realized that even his trust in the hermit and the path was, at first, merely a hopeful belief, not a certainty. One evening, they encountered a group of ascetics performing elaborate rituals, chanting ancient formulas, and undergoing severe austerities, believing these external acts alone would purify them. The traveler watched, feeling a pull of confusion. Were his simple, internal steps enough? Was he missing some essential, powerful rite? The hermit saw the doubt clouding his expression. The path is not found in the turning of beads, nor in the posture of the body, nor in the severity of the penance. These are forms. The path is found in the clarity of the mind. If you doubt the efficacy of the inner work, test it. Observe your own suffering. When you see a moment of craving arise, and you meet it with pure awareness, does the suffering increase or diminish? The traveler retreated to meditate. He focused on the raw sensation of breathing. When a doubt arose, is this true? Is this real freedom? He did not argue with it or suppress it. He simply watched the doubt as a mental formation, seeing its birth, its brief life, and its inevitable dissolution. He saw that the doubt itself was impermanent, merely a passing cloud. In that moment, the ground beneath him solidified. He realized that the truth of the path was self-evident. It was not dependent on the hermit's authority or any external ritual, but on the direct, moment-to-moment experience of cause and effect within his own consciousness. The need for external validation vanished. The belief that salvation lay in strict adherence to forms, and the fundamental doubt about the efficacy of the path, dissolved like mist. He had entered the stream. The direction was set, the destination assured. The hermit smiled, recognizing the profound, irreversible shift. The stream is entered. The current now carries you. You will never again mistake the shadow for the substance, or the temporary self for the eternal reality. But the current is strong, and the journey continues. They continued their ascent. The air grew thinner, the beauty of the mountain more stark. The traveler felt the world with heightened sensitivity. The scent of pine was intoxicating, the warmth of the sun on his skin exquisite. This clarity, however, brought a new challenge. His mind, freed from the heavy burden of false views, now had a sharper capacity for pleasure and pain. He found himself lingering too long on the memory of a pleasant meal, or anticipating the comfort of rest. Conversely, the slightest discomfort, a stone in his sandal, a buzzing insect, triggered a disproportionate wave of irritation. "Look closely," instructed the hermit. "Is the pleasure in the object, or in the mind's grasping of the object? When the pleasure fades, what remains? Only the craving for its return. Look closely at the pain. Is the pain in the sensation or in the mind's resistance to the sensation? When the resistance ceases, the sensation remains, but the suffering diminishes. The traveler began to practice observing desire and aversion with the same detached clarity he had used to observe doubt. He saw that sensual desire was merely a fleeting hot energy in the body, and ill will was a tight contracting knot in the chest. They were not him. They were merely events passing through the field of awareness. He learned to let the sweet taste pass without clinging to the memory, and to let the sting of the cold pass without generating resentment. The grip of these powerful emotional forces weakened daily. He was no longer trying to eliminate them, but simply refusing to feed them with identification. He was cultivating the purity that would ensure he would return to this world only once more, having nearly mastered the art of non-clinging to the world's dualities. The path toward the next fruit was now defined by this gentle, persistent refinement of the heart. The traveler continued his journey, his steps now imbued with an almost unnatural lightness. The world no longer held the same magnetic pull. The sharp edges of desire and aversion had been filed down to dull nubs. He had mastered the immediate reactions to pleasure and pain, ensuring his return to this realm would never happen again. Yet a subtle tension remained, a faint, persistent hum beneath the surface of his awareness. They descended into a valley shrouded in perpetual mist, a place where the air was heavy and the silence absolute. Here, the external world offered little distraction, forcing the traveler's gaze entirely inward. During meditation, he noticed a peculiar phenomenon. When his mind achieved deep stillness, a subtle sense of superiority would occasionally arise, a quiet, internal satisfaction with his progress. I have done well. I have seen what others cannot. It was not arrogance in the common sense, but a refined, almost spiritual conceit, a subtle identification with the state of attainment itself. The hermit, watching him rise from a session, spoke into the silence. The self has many disguises. When the grosser forms of craving are abandoned, the self takes refuge in the subtle. It clings to the very idea of I, the one who has attained. This is the subtle conceit, the last vestige of the ego's need for definition. The traveler recognized the truth instantly. He saw that this subtle pride was a form of attachment, an attachment to the idea of himself as a superior being. He began to observe this conceit not as a flaw to be suppressed, but a mental formation to be dismantled. He realized that the I that had achieved the previous stages was just as impermanent and conditioned as the I that had suffered. When he saw the conceit arise, he met it with the same clear, non-judgmental awareness he used for sensation, and it dissolved, leaving behind a deeper, more profound humility. As they walked through the mist, the traveler found his mind was often restless, even when there was nothing specific to worry about. It was not the agitation of desire or ill will, but a pervasive, subtle mental flutter, a difficulty in sustaining perfect, unwavering equanimity. It was a low-grade anxiety, a background static that prevented absolute peace. This is the subtle agitation, the hermit explained. It is the mind's last resistance to total surrender. It is born from the lingering attachment to the 6 senses and the 5 aggregates, the subtle clinging to the idea that the world of form and feeling is somehow real and substantial, even if you no longer crave its pleasures. It is the subtle residual craving for the world of form. The traveler began to practice observing this mental restlessness. He found that whenever he focused too intently on the beauty of a stone or the sound of the dripping mist, the restlessness intensified. He was subtly craving the sensory experience, not for pleasure, but for definition and solidity.
He realized that true freedom meant releasing the need for the senses to define reality at all. He shifted his focus from the external forms to the awareness of the forms, seeing the senses themselves as merely conditioned processes. They reached a secluded cave carved high into the cliff face. Here, the traveler entered a period of deep, sustained meditation. He was now dealing with the most refined detachments, the craving for the higher, formless states of consciousness he sometimes touched in deep concentration. He would enter states of profound peace, where the body and the external world seemed to vanish, leaving only pure, boundless awareness. In these moments, a subtle craving arose, the desire to remain in that blissful, formless state forever, mistaking it for the final liberation. The hermit visited him, sensing the depth of his absorption. The mind, having abandoned the gross cravings of this world, now seeks refuge in the subtle heavens. You crave the world of pure formlessness, the blissful emptiness. This is the final, most refined attachment to existence itself. The traveler understood. He saw that even the most sublime, peaceful state was still a conditioned state, arising and passing away. To cling to it was merely to exchange a coarse prison for a golden cage. He applied the same razor-sharp awareness to the formless states as he had applied to the physical world. Impermanent, not self. As he released the subtle craving for the higher states, the final bond snapped. The subtle conceit, the mental restlessness, and the craving for both the world of form and the formless all vanished. The tension that had underpinned his existence disappeared, replaced by an unshakable, profound peace. He had become one who would never return to the cycle of becoming. The path of the non-returner was complete, and the threshold of the final liberation lay open before him.
The traveler emerged from the cave, the mist having lifted to reveal a world bathed in pristine sunlight. He stood on the threshold of the final path, having severed the 5 lower fetters that bound consciousness to the realms of desire and subtle form. He was utterly free from the need to return. The hermit met his gaze, not with words, but with a deep, silent recognition. The traveler felt an immense, quiet joy, but even this joy was observed, understood as merely a beautiful, conditioned state, not to be clung to. The journey now became an exploration of the absolute limits of awareness. The traveler was no longer seeking to remove fetters, but to extinguish the final, most subtle residues of ignorance that prevented the total, unconditioned freedom. They traveled to a high mountain lake, its surface perfectly still, reflecting the sky with flawless clarity. Here, the traveler focused on the last 2 remaining bonds, the subtle conceit and the deep underlying ignorance. He observed that even though the idea of I had vanished, there remained a subtle, almost imperceptible tendency to measure, to compare, to define the experience of awareness itself. It was not a conceit of superiority, but the subtle, final mechanism of the mind trying to assert a boundary between this awareness and that reality. It was the last faint echo of the impulse to define existence. The hermit pointed to the lake. The water is still, but if you look closely, the slightest ripple, the faintest breath of wind, disturbs the perfection of the reflection. That final subtle measuring is the last ripple of the self. It is the final, most refined form of the I am that must be extinguished. The traveler sat by the lake, observing this final, subtle movement. He saw that the moment he tried to grasp or define the state of freedom, the ripple appeared. He realized that true freedom lay in the complete cessation of all definition, all measurement, all comparison. He ceased all effort, allowing awareness to simply be without the slightest impulse to categorize it, even as free. As the subtle conceit dissolved, he turned his attention to the final barrier, the root of all suffering, the deepest layer of ignorance. This was not the ignorance of not knowing the Four Noble Truths which he had long overcome, but the fundamental ancient ignorance that subtly obscures the true nature of reality, the lack of total, unconditioned penetration of the truth of dependent origination. He saw that even in his state of profound peace, there was a momentary delay between the arising of a phenomenon and the full, total comprehension of its utter emptiness and unconditioned nature. It was like the briefest shadow cast by a light source before it illuminates the object perfectly. He spent days observing the arising and passing of every mental and physical phenomenon with microscopic precision. He watched the breath, the sound, the thought, not just as impermanent, but as utterly empty of any inherent existence, arising solely dependent on causes and conditions. In the deepest meditation, the final veil of ignorance lifted. The subtle shadow vanished. There was no longer any distinction between the observer and the observed, between the path and the destination, between the conditioned and the unconditioned. The mind became utterly, flawlessly purified. The ancient roots of craving, aversion, and delusion were not merely cut, but burned away entirely. He opened his eyes. The world was the same, yet profoundly different. The trees, the lake, the hermit, all were seen with a radical, unshakable clarity. There was no striving, no measuring, no comparison, no shadow. The process was complete. The hermit looked at him, his face radiating a profound stillness. "You have done what was to be done. You are an arahant." The traveler stood, feeling the complete cessation of all burden. There was no sense of achievement, only the boundless, unconditioned freedom. He was no longer the traveler, nor the hermit student, nor the one who had attained. He was simply the unconditioned awareness, forever free from the cycle of suffering. The path had vanished, leaving only the reality of the unmoving, uncreated, and utterly liberated mind.